I remember being at work at Browson Copper. It was 11 p.m. and I got a phone call and they were like, oh, one of our bartenders had an accident. And I said, what do you mean had an accident? They were like, yeah, he's in a hospital, but right now we're just trying to gather money to send him off to the village.
Policemen with their brutality, they were pursuing one Okada man on top bike too. Then that Okada went and jammed me on my back. And a Uber man entered our front. A glass of the car broke and cut off my vein.
This guy had his entire artery cut in a very, very important region of his arm.
It took me a rush to a Jakunde police station. From the police station, they said that I would talk what happened to me before anything, before they would take me to hospital. When they rushed me to hospital and blood is flowing out of my body, I was losing a lot of blood that very moment. I can't speak, I can't talk. They take me to the hospital. As they take me to the hospital, everybody, they know they are there, they are running away from me. Because that blood is everywhere. They can't stand. So they say they can't treat me. They take me to another hospital. They order an Uber and take me to another hospital at Bagada. And there is a hold up. I'm almost dying. As they took me there is emergency there already. And my own issue is an emergency. So the doctor there, they can't respond to me and why I'm dying.
They were like, well, they can't treat him. All the hospitals that we've taken him to are saying that it's too difficult to treat and he doesn't have money. So therefore, they should just take him to the village. I said, take him to the village to do what? If you can't treat him in Lagos, how are you going to treat him in the village? They were like, oh, no, not for treatment, just to go. I said, what, to go and die? They were like, well, I was like, you must be incredibly insane. Quickly transport him to the nearest private hospital. So they moved him, by the way, he was at the 5th hospital that night. So they moved him to Reddington in VI, at 2 a.m. I got a phone call at 10 a.m. saying that he was at the hospital and I needed to come and deposit 2 million naira in order to even start any treatment. You cannot, it's been 24 hours, you cannot tell me that you cannot even start any form of treatment until you receive 2 million. Where's he supposed to get 2 million from? They were like, well, bring the money or there's nothing we can do. So I remember I didn't even have a shower. I literally put my trainers on, rushed down to the hospital. And I think I paid them maybe 1.5 or 1.8 before they started any form of treatment, But of course, it was actually too late because all the other hospitals, and in cases like that, time is of the essence. All the other hospitals refused to treat him because it was either too complicated or they didn't have the money. He didn't have the money to pay them. And so eventually he ended up having to amputate his arm.
Everybody's trying to pay salaries. So if they don't pay for any reason, if we treat you, you don't pay, then who funds that? Like, what happens to resources, right? You buy equipment, you buy disposables, you buy so many things, cotton wool, spirits, like so many things that you use to treat people, right? If you don't pay for that, who pays?
But there's also a human element to, to healthcare,
so
which is the customer's perspective.
Yeah.
So a lot of people might be offended that, because they, someone there might not be watching this that says, okay, somebody I know died, and you're talking about having to pay for cotton wool. Humor me.
Oh, no.
So what do you say to them?
So it's which is why I said, like, there's two sides to this coin, right? And so no one gets me wrong, right? When you go to the hospital, you should be able to access care. That's the only industry in the world, right, where people expect to get services without payment. If you're honorable enough, you pay after you've gotten your service. If you're dishonorable, of which we have a lot of people, you walk out, right? And do they start chasing you to collect money after treating?
What is the worst case scenario if you take this patient in?
What's the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
The patient...
And he doesn't have money.
The patient, if you take patient, the worst case scenario for the hospital, right? If he doesn't have money, is that they treat you, they use so many resources, right, and they don't get their money back, right? For instance, outside the country, you go in, you see a doctor, blah, 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 everything you used, if you actually check your bill, you pay for, right? But then it's post-paid. They send the bill to you later on, right? But you pay for these things, right? In Nigeria, it's like, and that's because the system to track you, this and that, they send you an email. If not, they buy you, your credit score drops. There's so many things, right, that can happen. Here, like, the framework isn't there yet, right? We don't even know where anybody lives, right? So how am I going to chase you, right? There's many people that come to the hospital and you can never find them. The address they give you, you can't locate them. The phone number is off, right? It's a wrong phone number. Worst case scenario, they lose a lot of money.
And the hospital, if they keep taking patients in like this, they run down.
They basically run down. I like situations where back in school, I'd say a patient who couldn't afford certain things, right? And I mean, we wouldn't necessarily answer the patients as doctors, as a group doing ward rounds. We'll say, oh, this one can't pay, so it's just there, this and that, right? I remember one time when I actually had to call my mom. It's like, this patient, it's like, I really feel bad, this and that. How much is the money? Back then it was 50K, literally 50K. And she helped out. She sent money, she sent someone to pay for that person. But guess what? The guy's wife ran away with the money. So can you imagine? I was feeling bad, empathetic, sympathetic, right? As doctors, they say you should show empathy, not sympathy, right? I was empathetic for this patient, got money, brought to this family. Oh yeah, pay for your surgery. The woman runs away and the man is there, right? And they ended up having to cut his leg, right? Because it was gangrene and things like that, right? But then it's like, what happens there? She's interested in her kids. Like, her kids haven't eaten. We're saying her husband should get treated. So there's so many things so whose fault is that? That's the question. Is that the system? Is it the woman? Is it me for showing too much empathy? How many people can I actually look for money for?
God forbid you're in an accident now. The chances that you will live in this country is probably 12%, as opposed to our neighboring country.
Healthcare is everybody's business. At some point in your life, you have full body contact with the healthcare industry, whether it's the day you're born, the day you die, or somewhere in between. Everybody, rich, poor, in between, you will come into contact with the healthcare industry. You will meet a doctor, you will be in their office, they will meet you, you will go to a pharmacy, you will get tests done. Somehow, some way, you will come into contact with the healthcare industry. I think this is cut across almost every industry in Nigeria. The number one biggest problem every industry in Nigeria faces is an access to capital. Just because there isn't that much money in the system. Healthcare is particular because, added to the fact that there's no money, it's not an attractive investment opportunity to a lot of investors. And it's not attractive to them because they often compare it to things like fintech. That if I put in money today, in however many years, I'm getting, 20, 30, % back on my investment. In healthcare, it takes a longer time to reach that amount of money, and investors are like, I don't want this. The second, a very close second, is in terms of human resources. And coming from the perspective of, for whatever reason in Nigeria, healthcare facilities, whether it's hospital, labs, clinics, whatever it is, they tend to be run by medical professionals. These are people that have spent years, sometimes decades, because it's such an ongoing educational process to learn these things. They've learned how to treat people, how to care for people, how to treat sicknesses and diseases. They've not been trained how to run businesses. So it's a skill they need to pick up on the side. And not everyone can make that transition. And you now couple that with the fact that there isn't enough money to start with. So we're at a level where it just has to be, somebody rents a small space, goes to sit down there in the morning, hires one nurse, that either doesn't want to work in any more established institutions or just can't find a job in a more established institution, and they start their pharmacy, or they start their clinic, or they start their hospital. And some people have full-time jobs in bigger hospitals and still start their own on the side. So it's those two things that have made us operate our healthcare industry at a level that we are.
The average doctor earns maybe between 150K to 200K basic, right? And yeah, a month, and that's like basic, right? If you're in a fantastic place, maybe 2 something, right? And you've done 1 or 2 years there. It wasn't your starting salary, right? So you rarely have situations where you have starting salary above 200,000, right? So how much can that really do at the end of the day in this part of the world where you're filling your car, getting food, lights, rent? Like, how are you even going to pay your rent? Let's start there. So if you got a job today, how are you going to start paying your rent, right? If you need to get space, which is why some hospitals offer like dorms for doctors to stay, which is easier for a doctor because like I don't have to commute, right? I just stay in the compound, right? But not many opportunities like that where housing is provided, right? So all these things need to go into the holistic picture of making healthcare better. And then training as well, right? I mean, doctors need to be trained. I mean, it's one thing to finish school, right? And then not do any training until whenever, which is almost never, right? So doctors basically have to read to go outside the country. But in between, like, the whole process of treating people, you need to like update yourself and not necessarily be going for an exam trying to leave the country. And doctors want to be trained well, right? I mean, you go to school to become a doctor and you imagine so many things. You watch so many movies of how so many people saved lives. Doctor ran in here, did this, did that, and the patient is fine, right? You want people to do things like that, right? But you need training, right? And then most of our older doctors, right? Some of them have been frustrated, right? So they carry the frustrations down to use. Like, they've lived so long, they've worked so hard, and there's only little they can show for it, right? So there's frustration down there that's passed to you who's learning to become a doctor, right? Conditions are not exactly fun. I remember being in school and using lanterns and lights, right? And torchlight to read, candles to read back in school, right? Solar panels and solar power would help make for better healthcare. At least it gives you a good environment. Air conditions can work, right? There's light to see what you need to do, to see procedures. I mean, back in the day, I think I'm guessing things have changed now, but I mean, they take lights in a particular facility and you have to use your torch or your phone to see the surgeries you are doing, right? I don't want to think that still holds, but I mean, I've been in situations where like that would actually happen. So you go into a public hospital, right? Or you go to a hospital generally and the doctor has an attitude, right? I mean, doctor has to be catered for, right? Doctor has to be paid well, right? He has to be treated well, right? He has to have basic amenities provided for him. So if the doctor is staying on call, right? So he has to have a good call room, he has to have air conditioning, he has to have like good food, right? Doctors shouldn't be overworked, right? You don't basically like give doctor endless call times. So there's some doctors who work 24 hours like straight, right? Where you can basically have more than one doctor cover that shift, right? So all these basic things add up, right? And then you come to see that doctor in the hospital and the doctor is not even friendly, right? Because the doctor is tired, maybe the doctor hasn't been paid for a while, right? Still expecting salary. So the doctor is thinking of so many things. Doctor has a life, probably has kids at home, right? That he has to take care of, has a car he has to fuel, right? So many things, right? Are affecting the healthcare space. So I mean, so the doctor has his own issues, right? And the patients come with their own issues. So it's like issues meet issues, right? So it's like, whose issue is greater? There are not enough doctors, right? Because a lot of people, I mean, as we all know, there's a brain drain. A lot of people are leaving the country because, I mean, either the healthcare system isn't catering for them in the sense of providing to meet their needs, right? They're not paid well enough, they're not learning well enough, right? So it's like, you know what, I want to go to greener lands, right? Greener pastures to basically train myself properly, right? And then there are enough facilities, not enough infrastructure for you things to work with, equipment, right? I mean, we're using outdated equipment in this part of the world, so there's nothing to train you with, right? But then it's in the regard of the patient, right? There are not enough hospitals, and even with the hospitals there, right? It's either it's too expensive, or like you can't access care when you need it, which is one of the most important things. I can understand to a certain extent, okay, healthcare can be free. It's subsidized to a certain extent, like in the public sector, right? But even then, public sector, it's not good enough. It can be better, right? Hospitals can be better, right? There can be provision of more personnel. Like you go to a hospital where you have 1,000 patients working in the hospital a day, right? But there are only maybe 3 to 4 doctors to see 1,000 patients. How, right? Like, it doesn't even make sense, right? So you need more personnel in the hospitals, in public sector, right? And then in private sector, either the healthcare is too expensive, because I mean, which is why a lot of people go to public sector. There are more people in public sector than in private sector, not because the public sector is way better, right? I mean, it's because it's cheaper. They're understaffed in the public sector. There are more patients. It's cheaper there, more patients influx, right? In the private sector, right? I mean, there are enough doctors to a certain extent.
2020 has been a masterclass in the importance of healthcare industry. You look at the countries where, in terms of how they were able to handle the pandemic, the Chinas, the Taiwans, the Hong Kongs, You know, their economies are back on track, largely back on track. You know, they are going back to positive GDP growth. You look at the other side, you know, the US, the Brazils, that have, for one reason or the other, just struggled to get a grasp on this pandemic. You know, unemployment is record high, business closures are record high, and these business closures are businesses that will not reopen again. We've tried to deploy economic means, you know, fiscal, monetary policies, but you can't use fiscal and monetary policies to solve a healthcare crisis. And I think that's the biggest lesson we've learned, and it tells a lot of people you have to invest in healthcare because it's everyone's business.
Why can't we in Nigeria have better healthcare?
Well, I mean, I think it's a myriad of factors, right? From leaders, right, people in authority, whether in healthcare or in, I mean, general like government, right? Leaders actually thinking about like the healthcare space, right? I think it's one of the most underfunded spaces, right? In terms of like general budgets, right? Whether in Nigeria or in Lagos, right? So like not enough attention is being paid, right? And if you don't pay attention to something, right, then there's only so much you can really do, right? So we need people literally to actually like pay attention to it, right? So from facilities to people who train personnel, right, to the customer service, right? All that, right, is needed to change to actual funding of the space, right? It needs a lot of funding, it needs a lot of thought to go into it.
Do you want to help build a better Nigeria? Join our database to get access to exclusive content and learn how you can get involved. Click the link below to find out more.
So what would it take to improve the healthcare landscape here?
Aside from funding, people who actually desire to make a change, right? I mean, it's not just there's healthcare economics involved, right? It's the health economics. So there's money, there's the healthcare itself, there's equipment as well involved, right? So like all of that policy as well, a lot of policy has to change, right? Like treating people, you should be able to, all hospitals in Nigeria should be able to, for instance, treat people without payments first, right? Let's all find a way. Insurance as well has to go into it, right? So health insurance has to be a mainstay in this part of the world, right? So solution-wise, there has to be interest in the sector. Right? Personally, like I tell most of my friends who are outside the country now, like I die here, like literally, like I'm here for the long haul, right? There has to be interest. Like you have to be willing to change stuff.
Based on your knowledge on the healthcare, what is kind of a framework that would help bring in capital? Because it doesn't make sense that, you know, all these billionaires, they are easily flying all over the world, you know, to go and get the best medical treatment. Why can't they bring that back to this country and develop our healthcare system? And why wasn't COVID-19 a good enough reason to teach them the importance of this?
That's a good question. The jury is still out. I would say the jury is still out on whether we have learned the lesson from COVID. We first need to come through COVID to see if we've learned that lesson. So the jury is still out on if we've learned the lessons from COVID. Investing in healthcare will take years. It will be painful, you know, and it will take a lot of money. Will COVID give us the sense to start putting money in healthcare? I hope, for my sake and everyone's sake, you know, that we start doing that. But one thing is clear to us: we can't grow healthcare in Nigeria anywhere. We can't grow healthcare anywhere without necessary investment in technology. Because healthcare in this part of the world is largely funded by governments and international donors, private and public. And one of the things that we've realized that they do is they're throwing money in the dark and hoping it will stick, because there isn't data that tells them this actually sticks. And the fastest way to get that data is with technology, technological advancement. You think of a bank, you think of an app, you think of software. You don't think of buildings anymore in 2020. You think of healthcare, you think of buildings, you think of paper files, and you think of a white coat. You know, it shows that we are two different places. We need to get to a place where that technology has caught up to where we can fast forward growth, you know, and that's when we can start blitzscaling, as it were.
So are you specifically, when you say technology, are you specifically talking about digitization, or are you talking about machines having, you know, equipment that are strong enough, you know, that world class? What are you talking about?
So it starts from everything, but digitization is the bottom line, because the machines themselves are digitized. They need to be fed digital data. So digitization is the first thing across board. You need all the records digitized. You need the doctors' encounters with patients digitized. You need the hospital's operations digitized. You need everything digitized. And then you can now go to, the larger, huge machines and, robotics, AI, and all those things.
So Nigeria has a very big issue with digitization across the whole landscape, even down to some of these older businesses that other newspaper companies, etc. They don't even digitize. So to expect that from a police station or even you don't see it there. So why is there a lack of digitization in this country, and what can we do to take the step in the right direction?
I think it's a question of incentive. You think of 10 years ago, not even 10 years, 15 years ago, if you wanted to buy a recharge card, you were looking for an umbrella. If you've been in Nigeria that long, you were looking for an umbrella to buy a piece of paper. And now I can't remember the last time I saw an actual paper recharge card. Because even when you think about it, in the US, I think about 80 to 90% of hospitals use electronic medical records. So there's still a 10 to 20% that don't. Till every sector in the country is digitized, it will be difficult to reach 100% of digitization in certain industries because they relate with others. Do you understand what I mean? But you need the majority of that industry to be digitized so that the bulk of the data is in digital format.
So what are those fundamental businesses or industries that need to digitize first?
I mean, healthcare itself needs to start. Healthcare as a whole so think about it this way. If I run a hospital and the hospital to my left uses digital records, the hospital to my right uses digital records, it's incentive for me to do that. But whereas the hospital to my left, nothing, right, nothing, front, nothing, back, nothing. What am I? Unless I'm forward thinking enough that I want to stand out, I'm probably not going to do anything.
So what are some of the challenges getting these hospitals to digitize?
So one of it is the fact that the people that run, going back to people that run these hospitals, you've spent 10, 15, 20 years of medical practice, you've not used computer for one day. And then somebody says, come and try out this computer software, even if it's spreadsheets. Even if it's Microsoft Excel, I'm like, why? A man of my, or a woman of my status quo, with my medical experience, why? You need to, what are the other sectors I need to get in the same boat in digitization? Education. Because if I'm learning these things with these technologies, with these computers, with these softwares in school, when I come out, is what I'm going to be using. A lot of them don't have an incentive within themselves to do these things. But as more people begin to digitize, as the person to my left, as the person to my right, that's incentive in itself. Another incentive can be the government coming in and saying, and I know to some large extent the Lagos State government, this is one of the things that they want to accomplish, is telling the government coming and tell everybody, you need to have your records, medical records, in this format, and that format is digital. That's another incentive. That's what we've seen like some Western countries like the US, like in Thailand. As well, you've seen that where the government came in and says everybody goes digital by the end of next year or whatever. That's another incentive.
So has the Lagos State government done that?
No, they are still in the planning phases. So they are building the framework. Because another thing, if you don't get this right, set yourself up for more problem. And this is what we saw in the US, is the software I'm using in hospital A is different from the software I'm using in hospital B. And it's different from the software I'm using in hospital C. So it's not what they call interoperable. They don't speak to each other. That's not the system that you want. You want a system where hospital A software, even though it's different from B, even though it's different from C, they speak the same language. Think about it like your technology. An iPhone speaks to Android when they talk of text message, when they talk of Twitter. They know how to speak to themselves. So they are still, my understanding of the situation is that they are still trying to build out the framework and the process by which they can circumvent some of these problems.
Yeah, so people attribute a lot of the lack of digitization to corruption, the perpetuation of it. Can you speak on that?
Is there anything in Nigeria you can't attribute in some way to corruption? It's as basic as somebody writing, this incredible proposal about this is what we are going to do. Everybody thinks it's great, and then puts it on somebody's table, and it just sleeps there, or the person even pushes it. It's time for implementation, and somebody wants kickbacks. I don't think. It's quite unfortunate that there isn't anything in some way, shape, or form that isn't affected by just the rampant corruption in our society.
I think everybody can speak about someone that they've lost or they know of that has died because in an emergency situation, they were not able to. So what can be done systematically And is that funding from the government to fund emergencies? What is it specifically that needs to be put in place to be able to take patients before payment?
To be honest, insurance one, right?
So what can insurance companies do?
Insurance companies literally should be able to cover emergency care.
And what systems can be created for transparency? The same way the FEMCO showed us the funds in their accounts. Is that something that can be done for healthcare? For like an emergency fund that the public funds?
Oh yeah.
Is that being done? Like, let's talk about this.
Oh yeah, so literally, like, you took words out of my mouth. So literally, like, as in, I as a person, but then the company I work with generally, right? We're literally, like you said just now, we're literally setting up a fund. We're literally setting up like an emergency system, right? That is accountable to the public, right? So the idea would basically be like fund that, right? And that affords people receive emergency care to ensure that people are treated, right, when they get to hospitals, and people are actually tended to in emergencies.
What did you learn from FEMCO, and how can other people that want to create a similar fund for emergencies, what can they learn, and how can, that system, does it work?
Well, I guess it's half and half, right? Because the system will work. But it's one thing to get to make sure it aligns with the general direction. It's true that we can't do it alone. We're young people, we're the youth, right? We can't do it alone. We need a couple of people above us. We need like some of the leaders to be part of the system, right? So that there's no backlash, if you understand what I'm saying, right? I mean, so many things happen. I mean, I have to say this now, but so many things happen, like news of accounts being blocked, like things like that, right? That's because I guess a lot of people thought what FEMCO was doing, like people who were behind this, right, I thought what FEMCO was doing was against the system, right?
But right now, we're not talking about that specifically. Was because it had to do with the end Sars movement.
Yeah, exactly.
Which some people could argue is a terrorist
organization. Well, exactly.
Okay, but in this case, we're talking about healthcare in general.
Oh yes.
What are how will anyone try and break something down when you say, look, we have this much money in our account, this is how we're spending it? Are you telling me potentially some person in government will come and say, give me half of that money? So
honestly, I hope not. And I like to think, which is why we're getting to that space, right? And literally after the, it's been in the works, but then we've kind of ramped up like that plan, right? And hopefully like by December, by next year, we can roll out, right? And we hope no one will be opposed to it. But I mean, Nigeria is a different beast. Like I say this all the time, right? You don't know what you face until you get there. Mark my words, it will happen, right? Something like, I'd rather die, right, than see it not work.